September 15th, 1963, a bomb exploded before Sunday morning services at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Four Black girls were killed and many others were injured. The outrage following the incident and the clash between protesters and police helped draw attention to the civil rights struggle. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at OneMikeHistory.com. Also, you like to support the channel, you can do some on Buy Me Coffee on the Patreon page in the description below. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and support the YouTube channel. But without further ado, let's get started. Founded in 1873, the 16th Street Baptist Church quickly evolved into a place of worship and a significant hub for African-American social and cultural activities. During this climax of the civil rights movement during the 60s, this church often served as a space for leaders like Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, and Fred Shuttlesworth, and a meeting place for rallies. However, during the 60s, Birmingham was known as Bombingham, and it was a stronghold for the Ku Klux Klan, bearing some gruesome history of racially motivated bombings and violence. The city was a perfect representation of the era's cultural racism and segregation, with Jim Crow laws ensuring the disparity and discrimination of African Americans. These injustices found its way to every corner of daily life, from housing to transportation to education and employment. African Americans in the community were not only systematically marginalized, but often the subject of violent bigotry. The local law enforcement often ignored these racial injustices or even participated in this cycle of violence. In 1963, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Congress for Racial Equality began a campaign to desegregate the city. It was known as Project C for Confrontation. It would later be known as the Birmingham Campaign. This included a series of protests and boycotts, with the 16th Street Baptist Church serving as a meeting place for civil rights leaders. On May 2nd, 1963, over 1,000 students marched on downtown Birmingham to discuss racial segregation with the mayor. As a result of the demonstrations, the mayor agreed to integrate public facilities, including schools, within 90 days. This agreement was met with fierce resistance from Birmingham's white residents. In the days after the September 4th integration, 3 bombs were set off in the city, and additionally, other violent acts were reported. The Ku Klux Klan were very vocal of their criticism of the lack of action taken to block school integration. Because the 16th Street Baptist Church had long been a religious center for Montgomery's African-American population and a meeting place for civil rights organizers, it was seen as a symbol of the civil rights movement, making it an obvious target. Before the bombing, the Ku Klux Klan had routinely made bomb threats to disrupt civil rights gatherings and services at the church. So, September 15th, 1963, at least 15 sticks of dynamite with a time delay were planted near the 16th Street Baptist Church, and at 10:22 a.m., an anonymous caller alerted the church, and less than a minute later, a bomb was exploded. 5 children were in the basement at the time, changing into choir robes. The explosion left a hole 7 feet in diameter in the back wall of the church and a crater 5 feet wide and 2 feet deep in the basement. Windows up to 2 blocks away were damaged, and all of the stained glass in the church destroyed. When news of the bombing spread, hundreds of people gathered around the church to search for survivors. 4 Black girls, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Denise McNair, Carol Rosamond Robertson, and Cynthia Dion Wesley, were killed in the attack, with Sarah Collins, Annie Mae's sister, being blinded in one eye. Up to 14 to 22 other people were also injured in the attack. The situation in Birmingham quickly became volatile after the bombing, with Black and white youths clashing against each other, throwing objects, shouting insults, and local police and the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, responded by sending extra forces to help with the unrest. The Birmingham City Council, worried about the safety of the city, met to come up with a solution, but it declined to put in place a curfew. Within 24 hours of the bombing, at least 5 businesses and numerous cars were firebombed, with many cars being pelted with rocks from rioters. 2 African-American teens, Johnny Robinson and Virgil Ware, were killed within 7 hours of the 16th Street Church bombing. Robinson, who was 16 years old, was shot in the back while running away from a police officer who had allegedly given him the order to stop. It was believed that the police were responding to reports of African-American youths throwing rocks at cars driven by white people. Where a 13-year-old was shot in the chest and cheek with a revolver in a suburban neighborhood 15 miles away from the city. The 16-year-old white teenager by the name of Larry Sims fired the gun given to him by another youth, Michael Farley. Farley and Sims had been returning from a rally against integration and had denounced the church bombing. Sims fired 2 shots at Ware and his brother, who was sitting on the handlebars of a bicycle. Farley and Sims will later be convicted of second-degree manslaughter, but the judge suspended their sentence and gave them 2 years of probation instead. Civil rights activists in the city blamed the tragic church bombing on the inflammatory rhetoric of Governor George Wallace, who just 1 week prior, Wallace was quoted in an interview with the New York Times as claiming that Alabama needed some first-class funerals to prevent racial integration. In response to the tragedy, the city of Birmingham offered a $52,000 reward to the capture of the bombers, with Wallace pledging $5,000 on behalf of the state. Martin Luther King will rebuke Wallace in a telegram accusing him of creating a climate of violence that led up to the death. Attorney General Robert Kennedy organized a comprehensive investigation, dispatching 25 federal agents, including a bombs expert, to the city. September 17, 1963, Carol Rosamond Robertson was laid to rest at a private family funeral. Alpha, Carol's mother, had asked that her daughter be buried separately from the other victims due to comments made by Martin Luther King Jr., who said that the mindset that had enabled the murder of the 4 girls was caused by apathy and complacency of the Black people in Alabama. The funeral was held at St. John's African Methodist Episcopal Church with 1,600 people in attendance. Reverend C.E. Thomas asked the congregation to honor Carol by being calm, kind, and innocent. The following day, the funerals of the 4 other victims was held at 6th Avenue Baptist Church. 800 clergymen of all races were in attendance, including Martin Luther King Jr. King addressed the estimated 3,300 mourners with a speech stating that, in spite of the darkness of this hour, we must not become bitter. We must not lose our faith in our white brothers. Life is hard, and at times hard as crucible steel, but today you do not walk alone. He asked for solemn and forbade singing, shouting, or demonstrations. At the outset of the investigation, investigators hypothesized that the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing was caused by a bomb from a moving car. However, on September 20th, the FBI were able to confirm that the blast was caused by a disposal device that was intentionally planted near the church's women's lounge. Physical evidence such as sections of wire and remnants of red plastic, which could have been part of a timing device, were discovered at the site. The FBI struggled with their initial inquiry, but investigators were able to focus their attentions on a KKK splinter group known as the Kabaha Boys. The group had fewer than 30 active members, and the FBI and local investigators identified 4 members of the group as perpetrators of the bombing: Thomas Blanton Jr., Herman Frank Cash, Tommy Frank Cherry, and Robert Chambliss, with Chambliss being seen as the leader. Witnesses reported to have seen a group of white men in a turquoise 1957 Chevrolet near the church in the early morning of September 15th. Some descriptions of the white men who exited the car and headed to the steps of the church fit the body type of either Bobby Cherry or Robert Chambliss, but it was difficult to get a witness to cooperate, and there was not enough physical evidence. On September 26th, Chambliss was interviewed by the FBI. He later was indicted on charges of illegally purchasing and transporting dynamite, and he would later be convicted with 2 of his acquaintances on October 8th of illegal possession and the transportation of dynamite, with each receiving a $100 fine and a 180-day suspended sentence in jail. All of this information was given to J. Edgar Hoover, but federal charges were never filed against Chambliss or any of his co-conspirators in relation to the bombing. There had been a long-standing tension between local and federal prosecutors. Subsequently, Hoover vetoed any federal prosecution of the suspects, and he didn't share any evidence that the FBI had obtained with state and federal prosecutors. In 1968, the FBI closed the investigation, and the files were sealed by order of J. Edgar Hoover. The 16th Street Church bombing will remain unsolved until William Baxley became Attorney General of Alabama in January of 1971. Baxley, a student at the University of Alabama at the time of the bombing, was determined to take action. In the weeks after his election, he went over the Birmingham police files on the bombing and discovered that the evidence that they had obtained was mostly worthless. Baxley then reopened the case and was able to get witnesses to trust him, some of whom had been reluctant to testify previously. This enabled him to assemble evidence on Robert Chambliss that he had bought dynamite from the store on Highway 101 2 weeks prior to the bombing. Additionally, Baxley requested FBI files on the case and realized that evidence collected between 1963 and 1965 had not been shared with local prosecutors in Birmingham, and eventually he was granted access to evidence and used that to build a case against Chambliss. November 14th, 1977, Robert Chambliss, who was then 73, stood trial in Birmingham's Jefferson County Courthouse for his involvement in the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. Initially, Chambliss was indicted on 4 charges of murder. However, following a pretrial hearing presided on by Judge Wallace Gibson, ruled that the prosecution could not move forward with more than 1 count of murder. Despite the weight of the charges, Chambliss insisted on a not guilty plea, asserting that he had simply passed the dynamite that he had purchased to an individual by the name of Gary Thomas Rowe Jr., who had been linked to Klan activities and was reportedly acted as an informant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Over the course of the trial, prosecutors aimed to expose inconsistencies in Chambliss, calling forth 2 high-ranking law enforcement officials as well as witnesses' accounts to the bombing itself. Testimony from a retired Birmingham police officer named Tom Cook, alongside a police sergeant by the name of Ernie Cantwell, affirmed that Chambliss had not only confessed to owning dynamite at the time of the 1963 arrest, but also boasted that he had intimate knowledge of assembling a bomb. Similarly, Chambliss's niece, Reverend Elizabeth Cobbs, stated under oath that her uncle frequently boasted about his solo crusade against Black individuals dating back to the 1940s, and revealed to her the day prior to the bombing that he was in the possession of enough dynamite to level a significant portion of Birmingham. Furthermore, another witness, William Jackson, also testified that Chambliss had expressed frustration with the Klan's dragging its feet on the issue of racial integration. In the closing arguments, prosecutors acknowledged that Chambliss was not the only person involved in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, yet asked the jury to find him guilty. The defense argued that the prosecution's evidence was circumstantial and that Chambliss had not been charged in the 1963 church bombing. Following 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict, thus convicting Chambliss of the murder of Carol Denise McNair. Consequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Chambliss appealed his conviction, but was ultimately rejected and died in 1985. 2 of the 4 suspects, Thomas Blanton and Bobby Cherry, were still alive and were arrested and charged with 8 counts each of first-degree murder and universal malice. Cherry and Blanton were eventually brought to trial. Blanton was convicted in 2001 and sentenced to life in prison, where he died of unspecified causes in June 26 of 2020. Cherry was convicted in 2001 and also sentenced to life in prison, where he died of cancer in 2004. While Blanton and Cherry denied any involvement in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, Robert Chambliss maintained until his death that Gary Rowe Thomas Jr. was responsible. Rowe was encouraged to join the Ku Klux Klan in 1960 and was paid as an FBI informant from 1961 to 1965. During this period, he took part in multiple violent acts against both African Americans and white civil rights activists, later admitting to shooting and killing an unidentified Black man and being an accessory to another murder. A closer look into the investigator's file revealed that Rowe was unsuccessful in passing 2 polygraph tests regarding his role in the bombing. This led to some FBI agents presuming his guilt. Prosecutors initially planned to bring him as a witness in the Chambliss trial, but the district attorney decided not to after uncovering the outcome of the polygraph test. While Rowe was never officially implicated by the FBI in the conspiracy, the deceptive polygraph test stirred the possibility that Chambliss's allegations did hold some truth. Nonetheless, a 1979 investigation cleared Rowe of any involvement in the 16th Street church bombing. In the aftermath, the lasting impact of the 16th Street church bombing was far-reaching and profound, notably affecting the trajectory of the civil rights movement. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, the nation watched a stark reality of racial hatred laid bare for everybody to see. The explosion conducted by members of an offshoot of the Ku Klux Klan was a brazen act of domestic terrorism that was designed to instill fear, but instead it sparked an outrage and galvanized support for civil rights legislation. Prior to the bombing, many white Americans were unconvinced about the severity of racial violence in the South. However, graphic images of the church's destructive aftermath and the innocent lives that were lost hit a nerve nationwide. The bombing served as a grim wake-up call, forcing people and political leaders to confront the harsh realities that African Americans were experiencing. remembrance of the events and the victims over the past century have fortified its legacy. The four little black girls, Denise McNair, Kira Robertson, Annie Mae Collins, and Cynthia Wesley, have become embodiments of the civil rights struggle. The 16th Street Baptist Church itself has transformed into a symbol of resilience and strength and was declared a national landmark in 2006 and now houses a museum dedicated to the civil rights movement. The city of Birmingham memorialized the incident, serving as a tool for collective healing and promoting a shared understanding of its past. A large statue of Martin Luther King alongside a memorial of the four little black girls and the other victims of racial violence were erected in Kelly Ingram Park across the street from the church. These monuments became a powerful reminder to Birmingham's turbulent history and its journey to become a more inclusive city. Thank you. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been One Mic History. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this, OneMicHistory.com. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so. Buy me coffee, Patreon page in the description below. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and support the YouTube channel. Peace.